So the lead singer of this Christian band tried to unalive his own wife. And I'm not talking about some nobody band that plays at your local church basement. I'm talking about As I Lay Dying, one of the biggest names in Christian metalcore. The singer's name is Tim Lambesis, and at the time of this story, he's 32 years old, living in Southern California with his wife Megan and their 3 adopted children. Now, Tim wasn't just your average Christian metalcore frontman. This dude was really into his faith. Like, we're talking about a guy who was literally voted most like Jesus by his high school classmates. Yeah, that's a real thing that happened. He was basically the Ned Flanders of Christian metal. Super religious, super dedicated to his faith, and apparently super committed to his family. As I Lay Dying had been around since 2000, and they were crushing it in the Christian metal scene. Their albums were selling hundreds of thousands of copies. They were touring constantly. And Tim was seen as this role model for young Christian metalheads everywhere. But here's where things start to get weird. Around 2010, Tim starts getting really into fitness. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to get in shape, right? The guy had always been fairly thin, kind of that typical lanky frontman look. But Tim decides he wants to get absolutely swole. Not just fit, we're talking about completely transforming his body. He starts hitting the gym religiously, lifting weights for hours every day, completely obsessing over his physique. At first, it seems pretty innocent. He's working out, eating clean, taking protein supplements. He even becomes a spokesperson for some fitness supplement companies. But then things start to escalate because apparently natural gains aren't happening fast enough for Tim. He wants to get big, and he wants to get big now. So what does he do? He starts taking steroids. Not just a little bit here and there. We're talking about serious anabolic steroid use. And let me tell you, the transformation is dramatic. This guy goes from looking like your typical skinny metalcore frontman to looking like he could bench press a small car. He gains about 50 pounds of pure muscle in a relatively short time. His arms get huge, his chest gets massive. His whole body just explodes with size. If you look at photos of him from before and after, it's like looking at 2 completely different people. Now here's where the story gets dark. Because steroids don't just make you bigger. They mess with your head. Big time. We're talking about what's commonly known as roid rage, increased aggression, irritability, mood swings, and in some cases, completely altered personality. And Tim? He starts experiencing all of these side effects. His wife, Megan, starts noticing changes in him almost immediately. Sure, her husband is now ripped, but he's also acting like a completely different person. He's angry all the time, like constantly angry. Little things that never used to bother him now send him into these intense rage fits. He's spending ridiculous amounts of time at the gym. We're talking about multiple hours every single day. It becomes this obsession where he can't function if he doesn't get his workout in. But it's not just the gym time. Tim starts spending money like crazy. He's buying expensive cars, getting elaborate tattoos, purchasing all kinds of luxury items. Megan's watching their family finances get drained because her husband is having what can only be described as a midlife crisis on steroids. Literally. And then there's the other stuff. The really dark stuff. Tim starts dabbling in harder drugs. We're not just talking about steroids anymore. According to court documents and testimony, he begins using cocaine and heroin. This is a guy who was once the poster child for Christian values. And now he's shooting up heroin in between sets at metal shows. But perhaps the most devastating change for Megan is what happens to their relationship. Tim starts cheating on her. Not just with one person, we're talking about multiple affairs with different women. He's hooking up with strippers, he's got side chicks all over the place. And he's not even trying to hide it. This man who once stood on stage preaching about Christian values and the sanctity of marriage is now living a completely different lifestyle. The breaking point comes when Tim decides he's done pretending to be a Christian. One day, while he's on tour with As I Lay Dying, he sends Megan an email. Not a phone call, not a face-to-face conversation, an email. And in this email, he basically destroys their entire life together. He tells her that he doesn't love her anymore, that he wants to end their marriage. And here's the kicker, that he's no longer a Christian. Can you imagine getting that email from your spouse? The person you've been married to for 8 years, the father of your children, the guy who literally built his career on Christian values, suddenly tells you via email that he doesn't love you and doesn't believe in God anymore. Megan is absolutely devastated. But here's what makes this even more insane. It's not just Tim who's lost his faith. The entire band, AS I Lay Dying, has stopped believing in Christianity. The whole group has basically become atheist. But you know what they don't do? They don't tell their fans. They don't change their marketing. They continue to tour as a Christian band, continue to sell their music in Christian bookstores, continue to let their fans believe they're these devout Christians. Why? Because it's profitable. Christian metal sells records, and these guys have bills to pay. So you got this band that's completely lost their faith, but they're still pretending to be Christian because it's good for business. Meanwhile, their frontman is shooting up heroin and cheating on his wife. The hypocrisy is absolutely staggering. Back to Megan. After she gets this devastating email, she starts digging into Tim's life a little deeper. And what she finds is even worse than she imagined. She discovers that he's been having affairs with multiple women for months. She finds out about the drug use. She learns about a serious girlfriend he has in Florida. This isn't just a guy who's lost his faith. This is a guy who's been living a double life for who knows how long. So in 2012, Megan does what any reasonable person would do. She files for divorce. She's done with Tim's nonsense, done with his lies, done with his completely transformed personality. She wants out, and she wants to protect her children from whatever their father has become. But here's where Tim's roid rage really kicks into high gear. Because divorce proceedings take time, especially when you're dealing with custody of 3 children and significant assets. And Tim? He's getting more and more pissed off about how long this whole process is taking. In his mind, Megan is being difficult. She's dragging things out. She's costing him money with all these lawyer fees. He starts to convince himself that Megan is deliberately making the divorce as difficult as possible. He thinks she's trying to take him for everything he's worth. Most importantly, he becomes convinced that she's trying to keep him away from his children. The custody arrangement isn't giving him as much time with the kids as he wants, and in his steroid-fueled paranoia, he starts to believe that Megan is poisoning the children against him. Now, any normal person going through a difficult divorce might be frustrated by these things, but Tim isn't normal anymore. The steroids have completely altered his brain chemistry. His ability to think rationally has been compromised. His impulse control is gone. And that's when he comes up with the most insane plan imaginable. He decides he's going to hire a hitman to kill Megan. I want you to think about this for a second. This is a guy who was once voted most like Jesus in high school. A guy who built his entire career on Christian values. A guy who adopted 3 children and was supposed to be their father figure. And his solution to his divorce problems is to have his wife murdered. But here's the thing about hiring a hitman. It's not like ordering a pizza. You can't just look up Hitman in the yellow pages. Most normal people don't have connections to professional assassins. So Tim does what any suburban dad would do when he needs to find something sketchy. He asks around at his gym. He starts by approaching one of his gym buddies. Can you imagine being that guy? You're just trying to get your workout in, and your friend comes up to you and casually asks, "Hey, do you know anyone who would be willing to kill my wife for money?" What do you even say to that? Apparently this guy was like, "Nah, bro, I'm good on the whole murder thing." But word gets around, because of course it does. This isn't the kind of thing you can keep quiet. Soon, other people at the gym start hearing about Tim's little request. And eventually, the news gets back to one of the personal trainers at the gym. Let's call him Red. That's not his real name, but it'll be important later. So Red hears about this, and he's obviously freaked out. He's a personal trainer, not a hitman. He doesn't know any hitmen. And he certainly doesn't want to see anyone get murdered. But instead of just ignoring Tim, Red decides to do something about it. The next time Red sees Tim at the gym, he approaches him. And Tim, thinking that Red has heard about his request through the grapevine, immediately starts talking about his plan. He's like, "Hey, I heard you might be able to help me out with my wife's situation." And Red, trying to gather information, plays along. He's like, "Yeah, maybe I can help you out. Tell me what you need." And Tim just starts laying out his whole plan. He wants Megan dead. He wants it to look like an accident or a random crime. He's willing to pay good money for it. Red is listening to all this while secretly being horrified by what he's hearing. But Red is smart. Instead of just telling Tim to go away, he tells him that he actually does know someone who might be able to help. a guy named Red. Yeah, he uses his own nickname. He tells Tim that this Red guy is a professional who handles these kinds of situations. Tim gets excited. Finally, someone who can help him solve his Megan problem. What Tim doesn't know is that Red immediately goes to the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and reports the entire conversation. He tells them that this guy Tim Lambesis is trying to hire someone to kill his wife, and that he's told Tim he knows a hitman who might be able to help. The Sheriff's Department immediately recognizes the seriousness of the situation. They're not dealing with some random crazy person. Tim Lambesis is a public figure, a semi-famous musician with resources and connections. If he's serious about this murder plot, they need to stop him before he finds someone who's actually willing to go through with it. So they set up a sting operation. They assign an undercover detective to pose as Red the Hitman. This detective is experienced in undercover work, and his job is to get Tim to incriminate himself on tape. The plan is to have Tim meet with this fake hitman, discuss the murder plot, and hopefully get him to say enough incriminating stuff that they can arrest him. The meeting is set up for May 7, 2013, at a bookstore in Oceanside, California. Tim shows up thinking he's about to meet a professional killer who's going to solve all his problems. Instead, he's meeting a cop who's wearing a wire and recording everything. The conversation that follows is absolutely insane. Tim sits down with this undercover detective and starts laying out his entire plan. He wants Megan dead. He wants it to look like a random crime, and he's willing to pay for it. He hands the detective an envelope containing $1,000 in cash as a down payment. He also gives him photos of Megan, her address, details about her daily routine, and information about when she would be most vulnerable. But here's where it gets really detailed and disturbing. Tim doesn't just want Megan dead. He gives the fake hitman specific instructions on how to carry out the murder. He tells him about the best times to strike, the best locations, how to make it look like a random crime. This isn't just some heat-of-the-moment decision. Tim has clearly thought this through extensively. The detective, still playing his role as a hitman, asks Tim about payment. Tim agrees to pay $20,000 total, $1,000 up front, and $19,000 after the job is done. For context, that's about what a decent used car costs. Tim Lambesis valued his wife's life at less than the price of a Honda Civic. But here's the thing about sting operations. The police need to get the suspect to say specific, incriminating words. It's not enough for Tim to say, "I want her gone," or "I want her to disappear." They need him to explicitly say that he wants her killed or murdered. And throughout most of the conversation, Tim is being careful with his language. He keeps saying things like, "I want her gone," "I want her to never come back," "I want the problem solved." The detective keeps pushing him to be more specific. He's like, "So you want your wife of 8 years gone?" And Tim will just nod or say yes without elaborating. It's like he knows he's walking into dangerous territory, but he can't help himself. Finally, as they're wrapping up the meeting and getting ready to leave, the detective pushes one more time. He's like, "Just to be clear, what exactly do you want me to do to your wife?" And Tim, either out of frustration or because he just can't help himself anymore, finally says the words that seal his fate. "I want her dead." The second those words come out of his mouth, the detective gives a signal to the other officers who are listening in. They've got what they need. Tim Lambesis has just explicitly asked someone to murder his wife. He's provided payment, he's given detailed instructions, and he's done it all on tape. As Tim is walking out of the bookstore, thinking he's just set up the murder of his wife, police officers swarm him. They arrest him right there in the parking lot. The guy went from thinking he was about to become a widower to being in handcuffs in the span of about 2 minutes. The news of Tim's arrest absolutely explodes across the metal and Christian music communities. This is a guy who was seen as a role model, a leader in the Christian metal scene, and now he's been arrested for trying to hire a hitman to kill his wife. The hypocrisy is staggering, and fans are completely shocked. His bail is set at $3 million. $3 million. That's how seriously the court takes this case. They also fit him with a GPS monitoring device and put him under house arrest. The message is clear. This guy is considered extremely dangerous. Initially, Tim pleads not guilty to all charges. His lawyer tries to argue that the steroids affected his judgment, that he wasn't in his right mind when he made these decisions. They're basically going with a roid rage defense, claiming that the anabolic steroids altered his brain chemistry so severely that he couldn't think clearly. And you know what? There might be some truth to that. Studies have shown that anabolic steroids can cause significant personality changes, increased aggression, and impaired judgment. But here's the thing. As the judge eventually points out during sentencing, plenty of people use steroids without trying to hire hitmen to kill their spouses. The steroids might have been a contributing factor, but they don't excuse what Tim did. The legal process drags on for months. During this time, more details about Tim's behavior leading up to the arrest come out. Testimony reveals that he had told multiple people at the gym about wanting to get rid of his wife. He had asked several different people if they knew anyone who could help him with his problem. This wasn't just one bad decision. This was a pattern of behavior that had been building for weeks or months. Megan, meanwhile, is dealing with the horrifying reality that the father of her children actually tried to have her killed. She has to live with the knowledge that if not for the intervention of that gym trainer and the undercover detective, she might be dead. The man she had loved and trusted for 8 years had literally put a price on her head. Eventually, in February 2014, Tim changes his plea to guilty. He admits to soliciting murder and acknowledges that he had tried to hire someone to kill his wife. The evidence against him is overwhelming. There's the recorded conversation, the payment, the detailed instructions, multiple witnesses who heard him talking about wanting to kill Megan. There's really no defense. At his sentencing hearing in May 2014, both sides present their arguments. Tim's lawyer continues to emphasize the role of steroids in his decision-making. They bring in experts who testify about the psychological effects of anabolic steroids. They argue that Tim is not the same person who committed these crimes, that he's gotten clean and is back to his normal self. Megan also speaks at the sentencing. She talks about how Tim had seemed dangerous in the months leading up to his arrest. She describes the fear she felt, the way his personality had completely changed, and the impact this has had on their children. She's asking for the maximum sentence, arguing that Tim's actions were calculated and deliberate. The judge, however, is not sympathetic to the steroid defense. He acknowledges that steroids might have played a role, but he points out that millions of people use steroids without trying to commit murder. He says there was something twisted inside the defendant that made him consider murder as a solution to his problems. Tim is sentenced to 6 years in prison. He's also given credit for the 48 days he'd already served in custody, but he's looking at spending the next 6 years behind bars. For a guy who was once a successful musician with a family and a career, this is a devastating fall from grace. But the story doesn't end there. In December 2016, after serving just over 2 years of his sentence, Tim is released on parole. He's served about a third of his sentence and is now free to try to rebuild his life. One of the first things he does is issue a public apology. He acknowledges that what he did was wrong, that there's no excuse for trying to have someone killed, and that he takes full responsibility for his actions. He talks about how the steroids affected his thinking, but he doesn't use that as an excuse. He says he's gotten his life together, he's off the steroids, and he wants to make amends. But here's where things get really interesting. Tim doesn't just disappear into obscurity. He decides to get As I Lay Dying back together. Remember, this is the band that had continued to market itself as Christian even after all the members had lost their faith. Now their frontman is a convicted felon who tried to have his wife killed. The reformation of As I Lay Dying is controversial, to say the least. Some fans are willing to forgive and forget, arguing that Tim has paid his debt to society and deserves a second chance. Others are absolutely outraged that he's trying to restart his music career. The metal community is divided. Tim tries to address the controversy head-on. He does interviews where he talks about his time in prison, the mistakes he made, and how he's working to become a better person. He's honest about the fact that he's no longer a Christian, that the band is no longer a Christian band, and that they're moving forward as a secular metal act. But the drama doesn't stop there. The reformation of As I Lay Dying is plagued with problems. Several of the original members want nothing to do with Tim. They've formed their own band called Woven War and want to distance themselves from their former frontman. The lineup of As I Lay Dying keeps changing as musicians join and then leave, apparently unable to deal with the controversy surrounding Tim. In 2018, As I Lay Dying releases their first album since Tim's arrest, It's called My Own Grave, and it's seen as Tim's attempt to address his past mistakes through music. The album is actually pretty well received critically, and it seems like maybe the band can move forward despite everything that's happened. But then in 2019, more drama erupts. This time, it's not about Tim's past crimes. It's about his present behavior. Several members of the Reformed As I Lay Dying quit the band, citing Tim's toxic behavior and his refusal to take responsibility for the band's problems. They accuse him of being controlling, manipulative, and difficult to work with. One of the departing members, Josh Gilbert, makes a statement saying that Tim hasn't really changed, that he's still the same person who was capable of trying to have his wife killed. Other former members make similar statements, suggesting that Tim's public redemption story is just an act. Tim responds to these accusations by saying that he's not perfect, that he's still working on himself, and that he's committed to being a better person. But the damage is done. The Reformed As I Lay Dying falls apart again, and Tim is once again facing public scrutiny about his character and behavior. Throughout all of this, Megan has been trying to rebuild her life. She's had to deal with the trauma of almost being murdered by her husband, the stress of raising 3 children as a single mother, and the ongoing public attention that comes with being the target of such a high-profile murder plot. In interviews, she's talked about how difficult it's been to move on from what happened. She's had to explain to her children why their father tried to have their mother killed. She's had to deal with the fear that Tim might try something again, and she's had to watch as he's attempted to rebuild his career and public image. The psychological impact of what Tim did cannot be overstated. This wasn't just a case of domestic violence. This was a calculated attempt to have someone murdered. Megan has had to live with the knowledge that the person she trusted most in the world was willing to pay to have her killed. That kind of betrayal leaves scars that never fully heal. The case has also raised questions about the role of performance-enhancing drugs in violent crime. Tim's steroid use was clearly a contributing factor to his increasingly erratic behavior. The dramatic personality changes he experienced, the increased aggression, the decreased impulse control, the paranoid thinking, are all consistent with the side effects of long-term anabolic steroid use. But as the judge pointed out during sentencing, steroids alone don't turn someone into a would-be killer. There had to be something else going on, some underlying character flaw or psychological issue that made Tim capable of considering murder as a solution to his problems. The case has also highlighted the hypocrisy that can exist in the Christian music industry. Here was a band that built its entire brand on Christian values, but the members had secretly lost their faith and were continuing to market themselves as Christians purely for financial reasons. The frontman was using hard drugs, cheating on his wife, and eventually trying to have her killed, all while being held up as a role model for Christian youth. This kind of hypocrisy isn't unique to As I Lay Dying. The Christian music industry has been rocked by numerous scandals over the years, from financial fraud to sexual abuse to drug addiction. But the Tim Lambesis case is particularly shocking because of how far he fell and how dramatically he betrayed the values he claimed to represent. The legal system's handling of the case has also been noteworthy. The sting operation that caught Tim was expertly executed, and the fact that they were able to get such clear evidence of his intentions made prosecution relatively straightforward. The use of an undercover detective posing as a hitman is a common law enforcement technique, but it was particularly effective in this case because Tim was so eager to move forward with his plan. The sentence Tim received, 6 years in prison, has been debated by legal experts. Some argue that it was too lenient for someone who tried to have another person killed. Others point out that since no actual murder took place, and since Tim was clearly not in his right mind due to steroid use, the sentence was appropriate. The fact that Tim was released on parole after serving only a third of his sentence has also been controversial. Some people believe that someone who tried to commit murder should serve their full sentence, regardless of good behavior in prison. Others argue that the parole system is designed to give people second chances, and that Tim had demonstrated that he was no longer a threat to society. As of 2024, Tim Lambesis is still trying to rebuild his life and career. As I Lay Dying continues to make music, though with a constantly changing lineup and ongoing controversy. The band's fan base remains divided between those who believe in redemption and second chances, and those who think that some actions are unforgivable. The case serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of steroid use, the importance of mental health awareness, and the devastating consequences that can result from untreated psychological problems. It's also a reminder that fame and success don't make someone immune to making terrible, life-altering decisions. For Megan, the story is about survival and resilience. She managed to escape a potentially deadly situation not through her own actions, but through the intervention of strangers who recognized the seriousness of the threat she faced. She's had to rebuild her life from scratch, all while dealing with the trauma of what her husband tried to do to her. The case has also had a lasting impact on the metal music community. It's forced fans and industry professionals to grapple with questions about separating art from the artist, about forgiveness and redemption, and about the responsibility that comes with being in the public eye. Ultimately, the story of Tim Lambesis and his attempt to hire a hitman to kill his wife is a complex tale of how someone can completely lose their way. It's about the destructive power of drugs, the importance of mental health, and the devastating consequences that can result when someone's moral compass gets completely scrambled. It's also a story about the importance of speaking up when you see something wrong. If that gym trainer hadn't gone to the police, if the undercover detective hadn't done his job perfectly, if any part of the sting operation had gone wrong, Megan Lambesis might not be alive today. Sometimes, the actions of strangers can literally mean the difference between life and death. The case continues to be studied by criminologists, psychologists, and legal experts as an example of how quickly someone's life can spiral out of control and how important it is to have systems in place to protect potential victims of violence. As for Tim Lambesis himself, he remains a controversial figure in the metal community. Some people believe he's genuinely changed and deserves a second chance. Others think that trying to have someone killed is an unforgivable act that should follow him for the rest of his life. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. He's likely not the same person he was when he was using steroids and plotting murder, but he's also not the reformed saint that some of his supporters make him out to be. The story serves as a reminder that real life is often stranger and more dramatic than fiction. A Christian metal singer who loses his faith, gets addicted to steroids, and tries to hire a hitman to kill his wife? It sounds like something out of a movie, but it actually happened. And it happened to real people who had to live with the consequences of these actions.